The rain drummed incessantly against the windows, creating a melancholic symphony that blended with the rustle of the wind. I was in my kitchen, sitting on a worn wooden chair wrapped in an old sweater I'd been wearing for years. It was a gray, cold day, and the loneliness had grown heavier since his absence became a constant part of my life. My mind kept returning to those moments, to memories, surfacing like shadows in the darkness of the house. Every corner seemed to tell a story, but without him, those tales had lost their meaning. I knew that my life had changed irrevocably, minutely. I no longer paid attention to the little details. The coffee burning on the stove, the sound of cars passing on the street, the chatter of the neighbors. Everything felt foreign to me. I had resigned myself to this new existence, where the days blurred into each other, emotionless and meaningless. My phone was always pinging beside me, but I rarely looked at it. No one seemed interested in contacting me, and my social life had been reduced to old memories and yellowed photographs. That afternoon, while I dug my hands into a bag of stale cookies, the sound of the phone took me by surprise. It was a sound I never thought I would want to hear. With a sigh, I picked up the receiver and prepared to hear the latest news the outside world had to offer. "Hello?" I said, trying to mask my anxiety. "Hello, I am the estate attorney. I need to speak with you regarding an urgent matter." The voice on the other end sounded serious, almost grave. My heart leaped into the pool of my memories. The name of that man materialized, my son. I was already prepared to hear news I would have preferred not to receive. "What is it?" I asked, a bit hesitant. "I suggest you come to my office. The matter is a bit complex." My voice trembled. "Tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. "It is important," the lawyer replied, and before I had time to reply, he hung up. I stayed there with the receiver in my hand, unable to move. The words twisted in my mind. Urgent matter. What could it mean? The previous night felt like it would never end. I got up several times, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that was happening. My mind was crowded with thoughts and memories. There was a time when everything was simpler, when worries were far away and life seemed like just one long, straight road to travel. Back then, my world was full of color and dreams. Today, that world seemed to have vanished like a winter autumn. The next day, I dressed with care, wearing a suit I hadn't worn in a long time. It was a colorful dress, but it seemed as though the color had lost its vibrancy. I looked in the mirror and tried to find a reflection of myself, of that woman who once hummed with life. With one last look at the house, which now felt like an empty prison, I stepped out. The path to the lawyer's office was short, but every step felt heavy. Gray clouds covered the sky, making everything look gloomier. People walked quickly around me, each lost in their own world, and I felt invisible. When I arrived in front of the building, my legs trembled and my hands were sweating. I took a deep breath and went inside. The lawyer was already there, sitting behind a desk cluttered with documents. He welcomed me with a serious and professional look. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. "What is it?" I asked, trying not to let my anxiety show. "Ma'am, you have become part of a very complex legal matter," he began. "As you know, after your son's death, some issues regarding the will have emerged." His words pierced like blades, tearing me away from a reality I had tried to hide in. "The will?" I asked, trying to keep calm. "Exactly. Your daughter-in-law has become aware of the situation, and, well, things have become complicated." He looked me in the eyes, and I felt a shiver of fear. "You should know that she has not taken the matter of the inheritance well." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "I am sorry to have to tell you that your daughter-in-law has clearly expressed her desire to exclude you from any inheritance." These words hit me as if someone had stabbed me. She stated that, even though it was legally yours, she did not want you to receive anything. Memories began to make their way into my mind. The arguments, the anger, the pain of a family that had fallen apart. "I can't believe it," I murmured as a wave of emotion overwhelmed me. "There is more," the lawyer continued, raising a hand to stop my protests. "There is a clause in the will that must be discussed. There are particular circumstances." "What circumstances?" I asked, confused and distressed. "There are conditions that, if met, could change the situation radically." His voice dropped lower, almost as if he feared revealing a dangerous secret. "Indeed. What conditions?" I insisted, feeling a glimmer of hope. My mind was crowded with thoughts about what it could be. "You must simply wait. Tomorrow there will be an official reading of the will. I will ensure that he is present and can attend personally." Her expression turned more serious, as if she knew the revelation that was to follow could change everything. I awaited the following day with anxiety. The gray sky seemed to reflect my mood. The reading of the will was the culmination of weeks of anguish and uncertainty. I felt ready for anything, but also terrified at the idea of discovering what kind of inheritance I would find before me. I woke up at the crack of dawn on a gray Saturday. The sky was covered by heavy clouds, and the wind blew hard through the window cracks. My body, now marked by the years, felt tired and weary, but it was not physical fatigue that tormented me. It was the anguish of that imminent day, the day I would discover the contents of my husband's will. A week had passed since his heart had stopped beating, and his absence weighed on me like a boulder, not just from the pain of loss, but also from the uncertainty that gripped me. The house, once full of life and laughter, now felt like a mausoleum. I looked with sadness at the living room, where we often sat together to share stories and have a cup of tea. Now it was just a memory, an echo of what had been. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one, in particular, stood out. My daughter-in-law. The woman I had welcomed into my family like a daughter had surprised me with her behavior. Her lack of respect toward me hurt. I never thought my husband's absence could reveal such dark sides of her character. The date of the will reading approached, and the anxiety grew. The notary's call, with its formal tone, had marked the beginning of a storm, of a storm. Announcing that I would be present for the reading seemed to have bothered her. Her reaction was immediate, a mocking smile, eyes full of contempt, and the sentence that left me stunned. "I hope you enjoy life as a homeless person, because you won't get a cent. Because you won't get a cent." I couldn't believe that she could be the woman I had considered a part of my life. If something in her had changed, or perhaps it had always been there, waiting for an opportunity to emerge. I prepared for the appointment with care. I wore a simple dress that made me feel dignified and put my hair up in a chignon, just as my husband liked. I wanted to show myself as strong, not just for me, but for him, wherever he was. The journey to the notary seemed endless, and every red light felt longer than usual. Every bend in the road made my anxiety grow. When I finally arrived, I felt overwhelmed by the weight of uncertainty. The notary, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, greeted me with a serious expression, as if he understood the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. In the room were also some members of my husband's family, but the presence of my daughter-in-law overshadowed the rest. Her posture, stiff and haughty, made me feel even more vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," the notary said, breaking the tense silence. "We are here to discuss the succession. It is a delicate moment, and I want to assure you that everything will be done properly." His words seemed empty, but in that moment, I was grateful for that formalism. It was a sort of protection against the palpable hostility that filled the air. The reading of the will began, and I tried to remain calm. I could feel my heartbeat resonating in my ears. The notary began to read, clearly enunciating the names and properties, like a priest reciting a sacred passage. "To my children, to my grandchildren," His professional tone did not change, but I sensed the emotional vibrations of those present, the tensions, the furtive glances. My daughter-in-law seemed impatient, typing nervously on her phone, but when the notary said my name, she snapped her head up as if whipped. To my wife, I leave our family apartment along with a sum I deem necessary to ensure her a decent existence. His words seemed to vanish into thin air as my heart slowed its beat. There was a sum. I had an apartment. My mind was trying to process the information when my daughter-in-law incredibly burst into a brutal laugh. What? An apartment? And you really think that is enough? You can't even manage the bills, let alone a house, eh? Her words were like daggers, and for a moment I remained silent in disbelief. The notary, struck by the woman's impertinence, tried to maintain control. There are still some final provisions, he said, and the tension in the room became palpable. There are conditions that... A moment of pause, and I felt the adrenaline rising. To my wife, I also leave a considerable sum, enough to live peacefully, but with a clause. She must demonstrate that she can manage the money responsibly. My daughter-in-law froze. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I saw a cloud of a strange emotion pass, a mix of disbelief and fear. What? She murmured as the notary continued to read. And if she is unable to demonstrate her responsibility within 2 years, the sum will be donated to charity. The silence that followed was deafening. My daughter-in-law, petrified, stared at the notary. Her eyes filled with unexpected fury, but what happened next was completely unforeseen. She let go, and with a cry of despair, collapsed to the floor in a faint. The scene erupted into chaos. People rushed to help her while I stood there, gripped by a feeling of relief and disbelief. That cursed woman who had tried to humiliate me now lay on the floor, unable to accept the reality that had just unfolded. The notary, trying to assist her, gave me a knowing look as if to say that, despite everything, justice had prevailed. I felt a strange calm wash over me as the confusion faded away. I stood up and left the room, leaving the curious stares and anxious voices behind me. The time had come to face my new life, a life that could no longer be influenced by someone else's greed. I didn't know what the future held, but now I had a chance, a new opportunity to write my own destiny. I found myself in a situation I never imagined I would experience. The death of my son, an event as heartbreaking as it was unexpected, had shattered every certainty. And now, after his funeral, I faced another bitter truth. My daughter-in-law, full of resentment and hatred, had thrown me out of the house. It was the house I had helped build with so much effort, the very same home where I had cared for and loved my son. The feeling of being expelled from a place that was not just a home, but a refuge of memories hit me like a violent wave. I remember receiving a call from the lawyer, a man who had always kept a professional and cold demeanor, but this time his tone was different. "It's time to discuss the will," he had said. My mind was clouded by grief, but I couldn't ignore the urgent need to address what was at stake. I was anxious, but at the same time, a part of me hoped there would be a reason to remain connected to my son, a tangible proof of his love for me. The lawyer's office was an elegant building in the city center. The waiting room was adorned with modern artwork and plants trying to mask the somewhat oppressive atmosphere. Every tick of the pendulum seemed to amplify my anguish. When they finally called me, my heart began to beat wildly. I sat down at the table, where some documents were stacked. The lawyer opened the folder and began to read. I remember my daughter-in-law was sitting right there beside me, a sarcastic smirk plastered on her face, as if she were waiting for the moment to mock me. "He left everything to me," she declared with a mocking laugh. "I hope you like living in poverty, because you'll never see a single cent." That sentence hit me like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't believe she could be so cruel in such a tragic moment. My hands were trembling, and my heart felt crushed by an unbearable weight. I never thought my family could sink to this level. But the lawyer kept reading, and his words began to take shape in an unexpected way. "There is one final part," he said, as the tension in the room intensified. My daughter-in-law turned serious, and her smile vanished. "My client stipulated that, in the event you were excluded from the house," his voice trailed off, drawing both our attentions. I felt my heart beating faster. "Esther, the ownership of the house would be transferred to you." I was paralyzed. I couldn't fully grasp what was happening. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. The lawyer continued. "Essentially, you have the right to continue living in the home you shared with the deceased, regardless of the arrangements he made regarding your daughter-in-law." The words bounced around in my mind. I realized that this house, which for me represented my bond with my son, would still be mine. My daughter-in-law, who had always considered herself the owner, was slowly realizing the meaning of those sentences. Her face shifted from relentless satisfaction to an expression of terror. "That's not possible," she whispered, trembling. "He can't do that." But reality had already been shaken. The lawyer gestured for her to be quiet, continuing with the reading of the clauses and conditions. My daughter-in-law began to lose her color. Her glares became terrible, loaded with hatred. I felt the strange sense of liberation mixed with an acute pain. Standing at that table with my daughter-in-law, who seemed to be sliding toward the brink of madness, was surreal. I didn't want revenge, yet justice finally seemed to have taken a concrete form. The realization of having won, even if in such an unexpected way, was almost thrilling. My daughter-in-law, who was laughing before, had now turned into a shadow of herself. "You can't think of staying here," she muttered, clenching her fists. "I'll make you pay for this. I'm not leaving without a fight." The words came out of her mouth with a ferocity I had never seen before. It was like watching a wounded animal willing to do anything to not lose its prey. "You have no choice," I replied, trying to stay calm. "This is your husband's house, and now, by his will, it is mine as well." Every word was a small victory, but I could not ignore the emptiness growing inside me. The house was tied to my son, and his absence was an unfillable void. There was no joy in claiming what was mine in such a bitter way. My daughter-in-law stood up, her hands trembling, and without warning she fainted to the floor. The dull thud of her body made me jump. The lawyer ran toward her, and I remained motionless, gripped by a mix of conflicting emotions. Her fall affected me more than I wanted to admit. Despite all the pain she had inflicted upon me, I did not wish for her death or her suffering. I only wanted her to understand the value of love, a value that now felt so alien to me. When my daughter-in-law regained consciousness, the lawyer made sure to call a doctor. Her eyes reflected an indescribable fear. My presence and the news of my inheritance seemed to have destroyed her. But I looked beyond her reaction. What was left of that bond I had tried to build with her as a mother? I would have liked to tell her that life taught us to forgive, to forget, but the words shattered in my throat. The reading of the will was over, and now it was time to make a decision. Despite the pain, I would not be the victim of that situation. I would let the house be a landmark for my son's memories and not battlefield. And with a heavy heart, I decided that I would continue to live there. Being chased away only meant that I would find a different path, a way to honor my son's memory. From that day forward, the house became my refuge. Every room carried the marks of a life lived. I decided to turn it into a place of love and memories, and although my daughter-in-law's presence continued to weigh like a dark cloud, I was determined to let the light prevail. A new era was about to begin, and with it, the opportunity to write a new chapter of my life. The house, which was once a haven of love, had turned into a battlefield. Every corner recalled a laugh, a silent conversation within these walls, but now everything was colored in a heavy gray. My daughter-in-law, whom I once considered a figure to be welcomed as part of my family, had become an oppressive presence, a source of resentment and hostility. It was as if her soul had absorbed the grief and, through it, developed an animosity toward me that had no justification. I saw the desire for revenge in her eyes, and indeed, on that fateful day, her gaze hardened even more when the lawyer spoke my son's name. The day of the will reading had been a minor nightmare. I had mentally prepared for every eventuality, but I could never have foreseen how the situation would degenerate. The room was small, and the dark wooden table dominated the space with silent authority. The cold color of the walls seemed to reflect the feelings of all of us. Sadness, fear, and, in particular, a palpable tension, and my daughter-in-law was sitting next to me, her hands clasped in a nervous gesture. She looked ready to snap at any moment. When the lawyer began to read my son's wishes, my thoughts scattered, like leaves in the wind. Every word was like a hammer blow, and I felt increasingly vulnerable. The lawyer's voice was deep and calm, but the words struck like poisoned arrows. To my wife, he left all real estate and personal property. The words rang in my head, and I felt the presence of my daughter-in-law beside me, growing more tense, ready to explode. I had never seen a person go from grief to rage so quickly. When it was finally my turn, my daughter-in-law couldn't help but sneer. I hope you enjoy life as a homeless person, because you won't see a cent of what belongs to this family. Her words were like a stab to the heart. As the lawyer continued to read, I remained silent, trying to process the grief for the loss of my only son and the injustice of the situation. When the lawyer paused and prepared to reveal the final part of the will, the tension became unbearable. "There is one last part," he said, and the room went silent. My daughter-in-law looked at me, her face reflecting defiance. What else could he have in mind? She seemed to be thinking, maybe he left an empty plate for you. Her irony was biting, and I wanted to respond, but the words remained stuck in my throat. "I have left a considerable sum of money for my mother. The lawyer's voice turned serious. "In a trust fund, accessible only if she proves she has undertaken a path of social reintegration and well-being." My son had not been an ordinary man. He always had a clear vision of the world and wanted me to have a chance to rebuild my life. But that "if" was like a boulder. My daughter-in-law could not contain her contempt. "What will you do? Live like a wretch to get a few pennies?" Her cold laughter rang out like a siren, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Her desire was for me to find a way to get back on my feet. "I don't have to prove anything to you," I replied, trying to stay calm but feeling fury creeping into my voice. I wanted to free myself from that oppressive atmosphere. I wanted to scream, cry, and embrace that wound which was tearing me apart. Every heartbeat sounded like a drum boom foretelling an inevitable clash. My daughter-in-law, increasingly agitated, began to spew words of contempt, trying to destroy the moment in which, despite everything, I felt a glimmer of hope. "Didn't you worry about anything? You never loved me. You always just wanted the power in the house." Her accusation struck me. It was true in a way that our relationship had always been tense, but it had never been so vital as to destroy what we both loved, that boy who was no longer here. "And you are just a parasite," I replied, while the lawyer, worried, tried to keep his cool. "Every day I saw how you tried to control, dominate, and destroy what remains of him for your own gain." The stark gravity of the situation became palpable, and the lawyer, after speaking calmly, tried to restore order. "We should keep this discussion professional," he said. But the words remained suspended in the thick air, unable to achieve the desired result. When the lawyer finally turned to me, a new unease appeared in his features. Apparently, there are further details regarding the fund. If you decide to accept the challenge, you will have access to a rehabilitation and reintegration program. If you decide to do it, the fund will guarantee you not only financial security, but also an opportunity to rebuild your life. His words filled me with a new determination. My daughter-in-law, upon hearing this, touched her face and, in a moment of pure negativity, fainted. It was as if the weight of her own malice had crushed her. Her reaction was a definitive confirmation of the truth. Her hatred would never win against my love. I had the chance to rebuild while she remained trapped in her own quicksand. As the lawyer worked to revive her, I wanted to take advantage of the moment of weakness. Remember, I said, that life can hit you in unexpected ways, but what matters is how you react to these blows. I was no longer interested in the hatred she had harbored toward me. I had a path before me, and I would find a way to explore it. When everything calmed down, and my daughter-in-law was taken away, I finally found myself alone, in an almost sacred silence. I looked at the items that belonged to my son, his books, his photographs, and sadness, mixed with a new illumination. The truth was that despite the grief, I finally felt free. There was nothing left to hold me back. These were the remains of a lost love that I would have to transform into something new. I used the time that followed to reflect. I had never thought about a life outside the walls of that house, but now, with a new opportunity on the horizon, I felt the need to get back on my feet. I had to find a way to honor my son's memory, not just for myself, but for all of us who had loved him deeply. And so, with the light filtering through the windows, I began to write. The story had to be told, and I was here to do it. Sunlight filtered through the faded curtains of my new home, a small apartment, located on the 5th floor of a gray building in the city center. The noises of the street blended with my thoughts, creating a backdrop of life that seemed so distant from the quiet I had known. Life after my son's death had changed in ways I could never have imagined. My daughter-in-law, with her cold and distant attitude, had cast me out with a cruelty that had left me speechless. Yet, as I watched the frenzy of people passing below my window, I realized that I finally had my chance to start over. The first weeks were the hardest. I would wake up every morning with the weight of loneliness, but there was also a glimmer of freedom beginning to make its way into my heart. I was no longer the invisible woman, ignored by family dynamics. It was as if I had regained a part of myself that I had lost over time. Every day, I took a walk in the park near my home where life seemed to resume its course. The trees with their lush green leaves danced to the rhythm of the wind, and the children playing on the swings brought a smile to my face. It was a simple life, but it was mine. One afternoon, while walking along the park paths, I noticed a group of women gathered around a bench. They seemed so close, immersed in a lively conversation. At first, I felt intimidated. My shyness resurfaced, but something inside me shook off the fear, and I approached them. "May I join you?" I asked, trying to mask the uncertainty in my voice. The women turned, smiling warmly. "Sure, we need another voice," one of them replied, inviting me to sit down. In that moment, I realized I could build new relationships. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The conversation quickly turned into a pleasant exchange of experiences and anecdotes. I spoke about my life, my family, and my forgotten passions. They listened attentively, and for the first time in months I felt understood. Laughter mingled with tears when one of them shared her story of loss, and slowly, a community was forming around me. Every week, we met talking about books, recipes, and even unfulfilled dreams. I began to feel a sense of belonging I thought I had lost forever. When one of them suggested organizing a small reading group, I didn't think twice about saying yes. Words had always been a refuge for me, and now it seemed I had the chance to explore new worlds. Soon after, I found myself browsing bookshelves in search of novels that could inspire our discussion. I discovered authors I didn't know, stories that would fill my nights and enrich the chats with my new friends. Every book I read led me to reflect on who I was and what I truly wanted to do with my life. Writing, which had been one of my youthful passions, returned, tickling my imagination. One morning, while leafing through a novel about change and rebirth, an idea came to me. I decided to write a series of stories based on lived experiences, mixing reality and fantasy. I wanted to tell the life of a woman who, like me, had faced loss and abandonment but found the strength to get back up and start over. The words flowed with surprising ease, as if I had opened a faucet of emotions and memories. Writing became a daily ritual. My mornings, filled with stories, and every written word seemed to bring back to life a piece of myself I thought was lost. As the months went by, my literary passport began to take shape. Each story was like a small piece of my life's puzzle, and I had found the courage to explore even the most painful aspects. During the reading group meetings, I began to share my stories. My new friends listened attentively, expressing their approval and encouraging me to continue. "You must publish them," they said. "Your words can help others." And I began to believe it. My mind was crowded with questions and possibilities. What if I really could publish a book? The idea filled me with both excitement and fear, but a part of me knew I could never forgive myself if I didn't at least try. So I started sending my stories to magazines and publishers, always with my heart in my throat, praying someone would recognize their value. One day, I received an unexpected call. A small publisher, struck by my writing, wanted to publish a collection of my stories. I remember staying silent in disbelief. The dream I had nurtured for months was about to become reality, but as joy mingled with surprise, I realized that what I was living wasn't just about my creative journey. It was also a way to honor my son's memory, to prove that, despite suffering and loss, life could still flourish. The publication arrived like a bolt from the blue, and the day of the book launch was a moment of great emotion. My friends from the book club were there, ready to support me, and I couldn't have asked for anything more. When I held the book in my hands for the first time, I felt a wave of gratitude and love. It was the result of a transformation that went beyond words, a testament to how, even in the darkest moments, it is possible to find the light. I was a new woman, with a story to tell and a community that supported me. In that moment, I understood that the journey wasn't over. On the contrary, it had just begun. The scars of my past would always be a part of me, but they didn't have to define my future. And as I watched my new friends smiling, I knew that together we would face whatever life had in store for us. I woke up that morning with the feeling that every beat of my heart was an echo of what I had lost. The house, once full of life and laughter, now felt like an empty shell. The walls were soaked in bittersweet memories, and every corner spoke of a life that seemed to have passed too quickly. I rose slowly from bed, my body responding with a sluggishness that mirrored the weight of the grief I carried inside. My son's funeral had been a surreal nightmare. Every familiar face, every word of comfort, felt like a reminder of the unbearable loss. His Nuora, now mistress of our old hearth, had behaved unexpectedly, but in a way it hadn't surprised me. After the ceremony, her mocking laughter echoed in my ears like poison. "I hope you enjoy living on the streets, because you won't be getting a cent," she had exclaimed, while her icy gaze rested upon me. I had never seen someone so pitiless, and yet I wondered if it was ignorance or fear that drove his actions. I was left alone, not just because my son was gone, but because the house we had shared had become her refuge. The thought that I had to leave everything we had built in my life made me feel like I was sinking into an abyss. My heart sank into panic every time I tried to imagine the future. I found myself living in limbo, waiting to discover what my son's will had in store for me. That morning, as I prepared to face the most dreaded of events, I felt the weight of my situation bearing down on me. The house, now ready to welcome the notary and all those who would attend the reading of the will, was a place of inner battles. Who could have thought that a blood bond could turn into a legal battlefield? My hands trembled as I slipped into a dress I hadn't worn in a long time, a silent tribute to the love of my life. When the notary arrived, the room was silent, charged with tension. The guests, including my daughter-in-law, had settled into comfortable armchairs, but their faces were tense. The notary, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and a furrowed brow, opened the file and began to read. Each word weighed like a boulder, and his sentences followed one another like a funeral litany. "I would like to start with the assets," he said, as my daughter-in-law leaned forward. Her gaze was greedy. "All real estate and movable assets have been transferred to?" His voice stopped for a long moment, as if he had examined the contents of a heavy bag of bones. I felt my heartbeat quicken. All my dreams of a serene life seemed to hang on that moment. The notary continued, in the wife's name, on the condition of a single clause. I was struck by a sudden anxiety. My daughter-in-law clenched her fists, but my gaze remained fixed on the notary's figure. His face kept a serious expression, and the tension that had grown in the room was palpable. "This clause stipulates that every benefit is granted only if the lady agrees to maintain a cordial relationship with the deceased's mother." The words sounded like a drumbeat, and silence followed the thumping of my heart. My daughter-in-law jumped to her feet, her face as pale as the moon. "This isn't right. I cannot accept this condition." Her hands trembled, and her voice rose while I remained there in a corner, unable to believe my good fortune. "There is more," the notary continued, as his voice calmed the storm. "My client has established a trust fund in your favor intended to ensure your financial independence. This fund amounts to a considerable sum that you will be able to use for your future projects." The notary's words struck like a lightning bolt. I would never have imagined such a revelation. My daughter-in-law, who until that moment seemed so sure, turned even paler. "Tal, you can't do this. It's senseless," she exclaimed, pleading as if each of her words could change reality. "The provisions of the will are clear," the notary retorted with a firmness that admitted no objections. "Any attempt to oppose what has been established will lead to the revocation of the benefits." At that moment, the circle closed. I felt that something inside me was changing. I was no longer just a victim at the mercy of events, but a woman with a new opportunity. I took refuge in the awareness that even if my son was no longer here, his love and wisdom continued to live on in me. When my daughter-in-law slipped away from the table and headed toward the exit, I gave her an imperceptible nod, sort of goodbye. I knew we could have shared a better bond, but her greed had blinded her, and now there remained only a void to fill. Takum. The notary closed the folder, looking me in the eyes. "Ma'am, I offer you my congratulations. Your strength is admirable." I felt those words were more than a simple compliment. They were an acknowledgement of my resilience. Leaving the house that had once been my family's refuge, I felt light, as if a huge stone had been lifted from my shoulders. Life still holds surprises, and that day had offered me the chance to turn the page. Looking back at the house, I knew I would have to find a new balance. I would never forget what I had lost, but walking toward the unknown, I felt a spark of hope shining in my heart again. Life went on, and with it, my battles and my victories. When life hits you unexpectedly, you get the impression that everything you've built with sacrifice can vanish into thin air in a blink. This is exactly what happened to me after my son's death. My existence took a turn I could never have imagined. My home, once a refuge of warmth and love, became a place of tension and hostility. My daughter-in-law, a woman I thought I knew, turned into a dark and threatening figure, drying up every glimmer of affection I had for her. Yet the final blow came during the reading of the will. Manhi. It was one of those rainy days when the sky seems to weep along with you. The sound of the rain drummed against the windows as if it wanted to accompany my sorrow. The day I received the call from the notary, I felt overwhelmed. All over again. I could never have imagined that moment would lead to such an emotional storm. I arrived at that man's office with a heavy heart, a mixture of anxiety and fear. I knew my son's will contained decisions that could radically change my prospects. Entering the office, I noticed the tense atmosphere. My daughter-in-law was already there, sitting with an expression that exuded an unpleasant confidence. As I approached, I could feel her gaze filled with contempt hidden behind a mask of courtesy. "You've finally arrived," she exclaimed in a voice that tried to mask the irony. "Let's hope you're not late, as usual." With a deep breath, I tried to remain calm. "I'm not here to argue," I replied. "I'm only trying to understand what your husband decided." I couldn't believe those words were coming out of my mouth. I never should have stooped to that level, but her provocative attitude pushed me toward conflict. The notary, an austere figure, interrupted our brief verbal battle. "May I begin?" he asked, implying that his patience was running thin. I nodded in agreement, while my daughter-in-law muttered to herself, clearly impatient. The reading of the will began. Every word seemed to weigh like a boulder. To my wife, I leave the house. To my mother, I leave a small emergency fund. The notary's words resonated like an echo in my ears. I couldn't believe my son had thought to secure a future for his partner while leaving me with a pittance. The climax arrived when the notary announced there is a final part I must reveal. My daughter-in-law stiffened, and a smug smile made its way across her face. "Surely he didn't leave anything to you, dear mother-in-law." "Life has a way of putting people in their place," she said, giggling, as if she had already won. With a nervous cough, the notary continued. "To my mother, I leave my entire estate, which includes the house and the fund. However, she must maintain dignified behavior toward her daughter-in-law." The words struck me like a bolt of lightning, and for a moment I had to check my disbelief. "What?" I asked in a low voice, while a growing frustration built up inside me. My daughter-in-law's reaction was immediate. Her face turned pale, as if she had seen a ghost. "This cannot be," she screamed, losing complete control. "It's not possible that you received everything. No pity, no consideration for the pain I was feeling." She felt betrayed, and I couldn't deny that, at that moment, a part of me felt a certain satisfaction. Justice sometimes has a way of manifesting in unexpected ways. The notary tried to remain calm. The wishes were clear. It is necessary to respect the deceased's wishes, but my daughter-in-law didn't give up. "I won't accept this," she slammed her fists on the table. "You don't deserve anything." And with those words, I realized that the war between us had just begun. The situation was becoming unbearable. With a firm gesture, I raised my voice. "Look, I don't want a war. It's not worth it. But I won't allow you to treat me this way. This is our son's will, and I must respect it." The tension in the air was palpable, and every word I spoke seemed to resonate like a war drum. My daughter-in-law's reaction was unexpected. In an instant, Her face contorted, and she slumped into the chair, fainted. I stepped toward her, but the notary stopped me. Leave it be. She probably just needs a moment. And so I had to wait while she came to, further shattering the already tense atmosphere. While I waited, a thought began to sprout in my mind. Life has a strange irony. All these years I had done my best to accept and love that woman, trying to see her as my son's wife. But now all I had received in return was contempt and cynicism. I wondered if it was time to drop the mask of tolerance and embrace a new chapter of my life, one that no longer included the shadow of her presence. When my daughter-in-law finally recovered, her attitude had changed. There was a sort of thinly veiled respect in her eyes, as if she had realized I had the strength to carry on our son's legacy. "You can't think I'll give up," she said, with a voice trembling with emotion. "This is not over." My response was simple. "I'm not trying to fight. I only want to honor our son's memory. And to do that, we must find a way to move forward, not to destroy each other." As the words left my mouth, I realized how important forgiveness was, even if the road was difficult. And so, in that cold notary office, a new chapter of our life began. I didn't know where it would lead us, but one thing was certain. No pain or family rivalry could erase a parent's love, and in his memory I was ready to fight the necessary battles, but with dignity and respect. Life, after the loss of a child, seemed to have left me without direction. Memories of moments spent together, the laughter, and the little daily arguments crowded my mind. I returned to them every time the silence of the house became unbearable. Until that day, I had tried to maintain harmony, despite the tension that had built up between me and my daughter-in-law. Her spite, which I had ignored until then, had turned into a poison spreading into every corner of our world. The notary's office was cold and austere, a place where emotions were imprisoned within the four walls of a gray room. I remember feeling a lump in my throat as I sat on a wooden chair trying to remain composed. My daughter-in-law, on the other hand, seemed anxious to grab everything. With her face set and eyes fixed on the table, I could not see a trace of pity or respect for the grief that united us. It was as if her soul were wrapped in a veil of darkness, and all she wanted was my total annihilation. As the notary began to read the words of the will, my mind traveled back to the moments when everything seemed perfect. My boy, with his infectious smile, and the love we had built together with his partner. But now it was all over, and that room felt like a mausoleum, where the lives of all of us hung by a fragile thread. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, and every word spoken by the notary seemed to amplify, echoing in my head like a sad funeral dirge. "And my estate shall be distributed as follows." His words floated in the air, while my daughter-in-law, impatient, began to drum her fingers on the table. The tension was palpable, and I knew that for her, every second that passed without the long-awaited news seemed like an eternity. When the notary finally reached the part regarding the distribution of assets, his tone changed, becoming more solemn. I seemed to see his gaze scanning for any sign of reaction from my daughter-in-law. And to my mother, in recognition of the sacrifices made and her unconditional love, I leave a considerable sum that will ensure her security and well-being. The words flowed like a rushing river, but the daughter-in-law didn't seem impressed. In fact, a mocking smile appeared on her face. "This is impossible. It makes no sense. Is this a way to humiliate us? A cruel joke?" Her voice, heavy with venom, made the already tense atmosphere shudder. I had spent years defending that woman, trying to understand her insecurities, and now, in an instant, everything I had done was dissolving like a soap bubble. "I am sorry if your expectations were not met," the notary replied calmly. But these are the final wishes of the deceased. I cannot change them. The daughter-in-law stood up, unable to contain the fury consuming her. And what am I supposed to do then? Live with a woman who had everything, while I gave my all to build a family? Her words were a blow dealt straight to the heart. She didn't understand that our pain was shared, that both of us had been deprived of what we loved most. In that moment, I decided to break the silence. It has never been easy for any of us. Every day has been a struggle, and you think my life has been without sacrifices. I don't want to fight you. I just want to honor my son's memory. My words flowed like a rushing river finally, feeling the need to express my pain. But the daughter-in-law was not listening. To me, you are nothing but an intruder. You are an affectionate mother, but now you're no longer needed. Don't expect me to stay here and keep you company. I hope you face the loneliness because you won't get any help from me. Her gaze was like ice, and her tone conveyed only contempt. I knew that the fight for my dignity had just begun. Without even realizing it, anxiety was consuming me. The daughter-in-law turned and left the office like a hurricane, leaving me surrounded by an aura of sadness. I looked at the notary who, with a look of understanding, signaled for me to follow. There is one more thing to discuss, he said, pushing the paper across the table. I felt as if my heart had skipped a beat. What do you mean? Is there more? My voice was trembling, and the wait felt like an eternity. His words were heavy with a weight I couldn't comprehend, but which I somehow knew could change everything. There is a sum that has been set aside in a trust fund for you. It was created to ensure you had a comfortable life, and the amount has been doubled. He did it in secret, wanting you to have a peaceful future. A sense of disbelief washed over me. I couldn't believe that, despite the hardships, my son had thought of me until his very last breath. The notary continued. This fund was designed so that you can live without worries. Unless there are legal challenges, it will all be yours. The words about the inheritance fell like a rain of petals on me, and a wave of relief and hope spread through my heart. This meant I could start over, build a new life, far from the negativity that surrounded me. When I finally left the office, the sunlight hit my face, illuminating my path. I didn't know what I would do next, but I was certain I would be able to face every trial that came my way. Life would go on, despite the pain. As I walked home, my heart felt light. This will wasn't just about money, but a recognition of the deep bond I had shared with my son for Zorad. The road to my new life would be long, but I had a clear goal. I would honor his memory not only by living, but by learning to forgive even those who had hurt me. My daughter-in-law would remain her sad reflection, but I would no longer let her bitterness define my existence. In time, I would find the strength to face adversity and write a new chapter in my life, one where love and dignity would always triumph over hatred and envy. And so, with a heart full of hope, I began my journey toward an uncertain but bright future, ready to rebuild my life from scratch, knowing that a parent's love is eternal and his light would always guide my path. The wind howled softly, carrying with it the dry leaves of late autumn. Twilight was wrapping my garden in a gentle gloom, but the beauty of the landscape could not comfort my heart. For a long time, my life had become a series of unexpected events, and my son's death had drawn an unbridgeable line between what was and what would be. I did not hide the truth from myself. I had always known my daughter-in-law held a grudge against me, but her behavior after my son's death went beyond my darkest predictions. The scene of the will reading was still vivid in my mind like a recurring nightmare. The day of the meeting, the atmosphere was tense and charged with an unbearable weight. The wooden chairs creaked as everyone sat in silence, and the air seemed thick with resentment. The lawyer, a man with an austere appearance, had entered the room with the will in his hand. I couldn't forget the way my daughter-in-law looked at me with those eyes, full of contempt that could have frozen the sun. "I hope you enjoy life on the street," she had exclaimed in her icy and sarcastic tone, "because you won't receive a single cent of what he left behind." Her words were like a stab wound striking me in the heart and leaving me breathless. My son, with all his faults, had always been my refuge. I had sacrificed so much for him, but I never imagined my love could be turned into a weapon against me. In that moment, I saw the true nature of that woman who, with her icy smile, had presented herself as the queen of a castle that could never be mine. The truth hit me like a lightning bolt. There had never been friendship between us, only mutual respect because of my son. With his death, that respect had shattered, leaving only an arid desert of resentment. The lawyer continued reading the will, but the words mixed with the sound of my heart in turmoil. "And now," he said, interrupting my thoughts, "there is a final part. We would like to announce—" My daughter-in-law turned toward him. Curiosity mingled with greed. The air in the room grew heavy, and a palpable tension surrounded the table. I remembered her hateful smirk, the one she used when she believed she was in control of the situation. "Now," the lawyer continued, "my client has decided to establish a trust fund in his mother's name." My mind went blank. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This fund will guarantee the lady financial support for the rest of her life." His words echoed in the room, and I remained paralyzed. My daughter-in-law, on the other hand, seemed to have found a new way to express her contempt, and her hands clenched into fists and her face tightened in a grimace of disbelief. "That's ridiculous. This cannot be," she screamed. Her voice vibrated with rage. "He would never do something like that." The lawyer tried to remain calm, but the woman kept ranting. She turned to me with a challenge in her eyes. "Did you think you could go back to your usual life? I won't let you get anything." Her words were like blades, cutting through the air and sinking into my already wounded soul. At that moment, a realization struck me. I would no longer allow her bitterness to decide my destiny. The idea of getting away from everyone and everything, of starting over, began to take shape. And I thought that perhaps my son's will was only a part of his legacy. The love we had shared, the laughter, the memories, all, that was the true wealth. Even if her choices could not erase the pain I felt, I would find a way to transform this pain into strength. My daughter-in-law, meanwhile, kept shooting me poisonous looks as if she could reduce me to ashes with the sheer power of her mind. She was no longer the woman I had known, but a being consumed by greed. The thought bothered me. But the more I looked at her, the more I understood how her hatred was a prison, and I did not want to live in the jail she had built for herself. As the room filled with her cry of disbelief, I felt increasingly serene. "Enough," I said, raising my voice above the clamor. All heads turned toward me. Silence fell suddenly. "I will not allow your hatred to define my future. I have lost a son, but I do not intend to lose myself as well." Words I never thought could come out of my mouth. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from determination. "If you want to fight, let's do it, but remember, true victory is not measured in money." My daughter-in-law, visibly shaken by some of my words, was left speechless. "Why?" The lawyer paused for a moment, scrutinizing our faces. "If you wish, we can discuss the trust fund and its conditions further." My daughter-in-law turned toward him, but I anticipated her reaction. "Yes, let's discuss it." But in a different place, far from these grudges, my proposal was accepted and the new meeting was scheduled. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a lightness I had never experienced before. My life, now rich with new possibilities, was calling to me. The idea of putting myself out there, of discovering who I was beyond the title of mother, began to take hold. My son's love had never faded, and now it manifested as a torrent of strength within me. Walking along the sidewalk, I noticed the sky turning blue and the sun beginning to reflect in a vibrant way. Every step was a promise of change. I knew the road would be difficult, but I also had the certainty that I had the power to rewrite my story. My son's laughter and memories would be my guide, and in the end, the light I would find would be brighter than any material inheritance. My journey was just beginning, but with a heart full of hope, I was ready to explore what life had to offer, embracing uncertainty as a fresh start. Life had taken an unexpected turn. 7 days had passed since that tragic moment when my entire world had collapsed. The sound of the telephone that once filled my home with joy and laughter had now become a distant memory. My daily life had changed forever, but the real storm had begun after our final goodbye. The house, a sanctuary for our memories, had become a place thick with tension, where the air was heavy and the silence was deafening. My son's death had left an unfillable void. Every corner of that house spoke of him. His abandoned toys, his photographs on the walls, even his scent lingered like an echo of the past. I couldn't imagine living without him. Each morning when I woke up, the reality hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind tried to deny what had happened, but the pain was always there, ready to wake up with me. The situation became complicated. My daughter-in-law, whom I once considered a daughter, had become a stranger, Her reaction to the loss had been unpredictable. Instead of seeking comfort, she seemed to have reserved only pain and contempt for me. Her words during the reading of the will echoed in my head like a curse. I hope you enjoy living on the street because you won't get a cent. That sentence had struck me like a sharp blade. Not only had I lost a son, but I had also lost the respect and love of someone I thought was family. I remembered the day of the reading of the will. My legs trembled as I walked into the lawyer's office. The room was cold and austere, the walls lined with legal books that seemed to observe the scene with indifference. My daughter-in-law was sitting across from me, her face tense and her muscles tight. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and as the lawyer began to read, I felt my heart beating faster and faster. After careful consideration, I leave everything to my wife and children. My beloved wife shall be entitled to all assets. The words flowed, but I felt the world collapsing around me. I was paralyzed, unable to react. My daughter-in-law, with a sardonic grin, turned toward me, her eyes sparkling with cynicism. When your child died, you lost everything, including this house. Get ready to live out in the open. He laughed, a cruel sound that tore my heart apart. I couldn't believe what was happening. My existence was reduced to a cruel game, and I had become the pawn to be sacrificed. Then, like a bolt from the blue, the lawyer spoke the words that changed the course of my life, our life. There is a final part of the will that must be right. His tone was neutral, but there was palpable tension in the air. My daughter-in-law stiffened, her eyes widened, and a sense of anxiety washed over me. What did it mean? What had my son provided for? After considering ties and relationships, I wished to leave my inheritance to she who has shown unconditional love for me in life, and therefore I leave a substantial fund to my mother. The words rang out like a heavenly song, wrapping me in an embrace of hope. My shoulders relaxed, and for a moment reality seemed to fade, but immediately after, my daughter-in-law's face collapsed. It seemed her world was about to collapse. You can't do this. You can't leave her anything. She's an old woman. The words, so laden with anger, hit me like a hurricane. Her reaction was extreme, and I couldn't believe how much she was willing to lose out of spite. The pain and injustices I had suffered turned into a burning, powerful flame. The lawyer continued to explain, but the words blurred in my mind. My daughter-in-law was standing, her face pale and her eyes full of fury. Did you really think you could make her laugh while I'm left here begging? My children need me without me. They have nothing. Her voice rose, shrill and pleading, but there was no more room for pity. In that moment, I felt a change within me, a strength I didn't think I had. The loss of my son, which had made me vulnerable, was turning into determination. I would not allow pain to make me a victim. I don't want your resentment. I want to take away everything that remains of my son, but I won't allow it. This house is the only place where I survived this pain, and I won't let you take it away. The words slipped from my lips like water that finally finds its course. My daughter-in-law froze, and for a moment, silence filled the room. It was as if even the air had ceased to move. Her expression shifted from anger to confusion. What do you mean? You have no money, you have nothing. Yes, I may have a house, I may have funds, but what matters most is my heart. And I loved your husband, I loved my son, Fi. This love cannot be measured by money. My voice became steady, and a sense of calm washed over me. My daughter-in-law collapsed into a chair, her shoulders trembling, and I felt that I had finally regained control of my life. Every tear shed, every sacrifice made, had led me to that moment. The joy of living, resilience and love for my son would light my path no matter what happened. In that moment, I understood that I would have to face life with courage, knowing that I was not alone, that my son's love was still with me. My story would not end with his passing, but would continue in ways I never imagined. And as my daughter-in-law slowly recovered from the surprise, I knew my legacy was not just material but an eternal bond that no one could ever break. When the news of my son's passing reached me, the world seemed to have stopped. A deafening silence enveloped my life, and every day became a struggle to face the void that had been created. The house, once full of laughter and love, had become a refuge of memories steeped in sadness. His absence manifested in every corner, like a shadow that refused to leave. Every morning, when the sun filtered through the curtains, I hoped to see his smile, but every time I woke up to a reality where everything had changed. After the ceremony, I found myself having to face what would be my son's final act, the reading of the will. I never imagined that day would bring me such intense emotion. My daughter-in-law, whom I had always considered part of my family, showed no signs of grief. On the contrary, she seemed impatient, almost anxious, to get her hands on his inheritance. I remember the way her eyes lit up at the thought of possessing what had been my son's, while I, as a mother, felt invisible, relegated to a secondary role, a secondary role. When the time finally came for the reading of the will, the tension in the air was palpable. We were gathered in an austere room, surrounded by lawyers and documents that would decide our future. My daughter-in-law, sitting next to me, kept casting nervous glances at the lawyer, as if she couldn't wait to hear the words that would confirm her hopes. I, on the other hand, felt a deep cold in my chest, realizing that the fate of all of us would be determined at that moment. "Gentle attendees," the lawyer began, "we are gathered here to read the last will and testament, of which we have the honor of being executors." His voice sounded professional, but at that moment every word seemed to come from a distant world, as if I were in a dream. The deceased left precise instructions regarding his wishes and his inheritance. My daughter-in-law frowned, anxious to hear how much she would receive. But as soon as the lawyer began referring to assets and property, her face grew darker. "To my dear son," the lawyer continued, "I leave my material assets, which include the house, the garden, and the car. My daughter-in-law let out a smug smile aloud. This is just the beginning, I thought to myself, while my heart ached from the loss of my son. But the lawyer did not stop there. And now, I ask you to pay attention, as there is a very important final part. The room fell into absolute silence. To his mother, I leave a special inheritance, he continued, a savings fund accumulated over the years amounting to a considerable sum. This sum has been designated to guarantee her security and her well-being for the rest of her life. The words resonated like an echo in my ears. My mind clouded over. I never would have thought my son had foreseen such generosity toward me. As the lawyer continued, my daughter-in-law began to lose her composure. "What are you saying?" she exclaimed, abruptly interrupting the lawyer. "It cannot be. He cannot leave anything to her." Her voice became shrill, and her hands shook nervously. You are just a mother. You have no right to anything." I thought back to all the sacrifices I had made, the sleepless nights and the milestones reached with difficulty. I raised a wonderful man, I thought, as pain mingled with the joy of knowing that even in his absence, my son wanted to take care of me. "I am not just a mother," I said out loud, trying to remain calm. "I am the mother of a man who always had respect for his roots and for the sacrifices I made for him." My daughter-in-law, enraged, stood up abruptly. "You have never had anything to do with our family. You are nothing but an intruder." Her voice was loaded with hate, and in that moment, for the first time, I understood how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. The eyes of the room turned toward us, and the lawyer, visibly embarrassed, tried to calm the spirits. "Please, let's try to stay calm," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. It is not the time for conflict, but his words were not enough to stop the storm that had been unleashed. My daughter-in-law turned toward me, her face twisted with rage. "I hope you enjoy living on the street, because you won't receive a cent from me." That point, I felt overwhelmed by a series of emotions. The fury hit me like a wave. The harsh words wounded me, but in a way, they also gave me a new strength. I would not allow anyone to trample on my rights or the memory of my son. And it was at that moment that my life began to change. "If this is how you want it to go, then so be it," I replied calmly. "But remember, you are not the one who decides my future. My son made his choice." My daughter-in-law's face paled, and for a moment she seemed lost. She turned toward the lawyer, as if expecting further explanation. But the man remained silent. I never thought that the reading of a will could generate such intense conflict. Yet here we are, in a battle for legitimacy and love. The atmosphere was tense, and my heart was beating fast. "And now what will you do?" I wondered while observing my daughter-in-law, who seemed to falter under the weight of her own words. The tension exploded when, suddenly, she collapsed to the floor, having fainted. Those present rushed to help her, while the lawyer grabbed his phone to call a doctor. I felt strange, almost as if my soul had found a way to emerge from that storm. Life went on, and as the drama unfolded before my eyes, the realization grew that the future was now in my hands. I observed the scene. The world surrounding me appeared distant. In that moment, I understood that life would never be the same. Not only had I lost a son, but I was also losing a bond that I never wanted to break. The house, which once had been a refuge, now seemed charged with tension and resentment. But my inheritance went beyond material goods. It was a lesson in resilience and determination. While the doctor examined my daughter-in-law, my mind filled with conflicting thoughts. I knew I would never be able to fill the void left by my son, but finally I was free to make my own choices. My life no longer depended on that woman who, in a single instant, had gone from being a daughter to becoming my worst enemy. In that moment, I realized that my son's true gift was the strength he had instilled in me. And so, while the world kept turning, my mind focused on a new chapter. I realized that I would no longer live in fear. I would no longer allow anyone to make me feel inferior. My inheritance wasn't just that sum of money, but the ability to rebuild my life from scratch, to rediscover who I really was beyond the role of a mother. When my daughter-in-law finally regained consciousness, her gaze met mine. In that moment, I felt a strange connection, an invisible thread that united us despite the adversity. Life had pitted us against each other, but we both had a choice to make, and with that choice, they could not take away my dignity or my right to be what I had always wanted to be. The world seemed to be giving me a second chance, and as I left the room with my head held high, I knew that even though the road ahead was long and full of obstacles, I would never again let someone else decide for me. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The air was thick and heavy, charged with a tense atmosphere, as I sat in that stiff notary's office, surrounded by familiar and unknown faces. The walls were adorned with diplomas and framed photographs of proud graduates, but to me, they just seemed like symbols of the indifference of a society that had never truly understood me. I had spent years walking in the shadows of my existence, but that day would mark a change, even if I had no idea at the time. After my son's death, the only bond I had with the world seemed to slip away, leaving me in an abyss of despair. My daughter-in-law, a woman I had always welcomed like a daughter, stared at me with eyes full of contempt as the notary read the will. Her words resonated in my mind like an echo, like a, "You won't receive a single cent. I hope you know how to live on the street." There, in that cold room, I felt my heart break. I had sacrificed so much for my family's happiness, and now I was being repaid with such cruelty. Her words were like a punch to the stomach, but I decided not to let myself be overwhelmed. Life had taught me to resist, to fight against adversity, and so, sitting there, I took a moment to reflect. As the notary read on, the world around me began to blur. I thought about all the times I had given up on my dreams for the desires of others. How many nights had I spent working hard to ensure a future for my loved ones? It seemed every sacrifice had been in vain, yet something inside me refused to give up. Then the notary, with a firm voice, announced, "There is a final clause." His words were like a flash of light piercing the darkness. My son, despite the hardships and misunderstandings, had thought of me. I didn't know how to react, but my daughter-in-law had already offered a mocking smirk as if she knew the day would end in her favor. "What is this clause?" she asked, raising an eyebrow in disbelief. The tension was palpable. The notary, with an enigmatic smile, continued, quote, "My dear client has left his mother a considerable sum to use to start a business as she pleases." My heart began to race. A business? I never imagined I would have such an opportunity. My mind, previously wrapped in clouds of sadness, began to clear. I already saw images of what I could do, the dreams I could finally realize. And as I reflected, I noticed that my daughter-in-law had turned pale, almost transparent. In an instant, her smile vanished and her body seemed to give way. And so, in a dramatic twist, she found herself fainting to the floor, while the notary and others present rushed to support her. For a moment, my mind wandered toward vengeful thoughts, but I decided to put the anger aside. Even though she had been cruel, she was still my grandson's mother. I had to be wise and thoughtful. "Is everything all right?" I asked the notary while watching the body slump to the ground. I wanted a moment for myself, away from the tension and conflicts. Yet I knew that day would change my perspective forever. Life had just reshuffled the deck, and I knew I had to be ready to face the consequences. Once my daughter-in-law recovered, the tension in the room became palpable. I could have exploited the moment, but I decided to proceed with caution. I wanted to understand how to face this new reality without further hurting a woman who, despite everything, had shared part of my life. The notary tried to restore order. Please, take a moment to recover. News regarding a will can be quite overwhelming. And so, while others leaned over her to help, I took a deep breath and focused on what was about to happen. I felt like a bird ready to take flight, eager to embrace the freedom that finally seemed within my reach. When everything calmed down and nerves settled, my daughter-in-law looked at me with piercing eyes. "I didn't think you could receive anything," she murmured, almost incredulous at my calm reaction. But now I was in control. I was no longer the resigned old woman who passively accepted her fate. I had unexpected power in my hands and felt the time had come to use it. "It's never too late to change," I said, trying to keep my tone calm but firm. "Life gives us a second chance even when we least expect it." Her lips trembled, and an expression of vulnerability crossed her face. I could see fear and anxiety had taken over, and as I watched her, I wondered if there was a chance to rebuild our bond. I decided to break that cycle of hatred. "I don't want any more conflict," I said. "We don't have to be enemies. Your husband left us a legacy, and not just a material one. We must find a way to honor him." My words seemed to hang in the air, but to my amazement, her expression began to change. A sort of understanding passed between us like an invisible thread. Perhaps we both knew that pain was a part of our shared life. "What kind of business do you have in mind?" she asked, her voice trembling but curious. I didn't expect that. Yet I felt a spark of hope. "I've always dreamed of opening a small cafe, a place where people could feel at home," I replied, sincerely. "A place where we can share food and stories, where people can find comfort." Her lips curled into a shy smile, and the tension that had divided us now seemed to dissolve, however slowly. "We could do it together," she said. For the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of light in her eyes. I didn't know if it was just the fruit of desperation or a true desire to rebuild, but in that moment, I accepted. The day that seemed destined to destroy us became the one that would unite us. There would be no revenge or grudges, only the possibility of a bright future. Even if nothing was guaranteed, hope had finally returned to shine. With my heart full of emotion, I left the office, ready to face the world with a new determination. Family ties, strained by loss, now had the chance to be reborn. And as I walked toward the future, I knew my story wasn't over, it was just beginning.